So what we're going to do first is John Bradford. We're going to give you a 3-minute opening statement.
Thank you. Welcome to Town Hall in Cornelius. Thank you, Chamber, for putting this on. I'm going to start with my family. My kids are actually here today because they're after school hours. So my wife Shay, Jack, who's 13, Molly, who's 11, and we went for a third child and got twins, Sophie and Macy. And I love you guys. Thank you for your support, because without it, this would be very difficult to do. I started my career of public service right here in District 98, right here in Cornelius. Actually, I was a park commissioner, so I got started. Then I ran for town council. Someone invited me to tea, literally tea, and they said, "You want to run for town council?" And I called my wife, and I went downtown and paid $5, and I ran. And many of you know, my first election, I won by 2 votes, so it was a close run. And I was elected a second time, and then of course I ran for State House. I'm a small business owner. I'm sort of all in on this district. I've lived here for 13 years. I started a business right here in Cornelius. In the last 10 years, I've created over 50 jobs, fueling the local economy. I've been a member of the Chamber ever since I started my company. When I won this seat and went to Raleigh, I just wanted to bring sort of common sense, business-like thinking. And in my first 2 years, folks, I went to work. I was elected as the freshman majority whip. I'm now serving on 9 committees for the House. I'm on 3 joint oversight legislative committees. I was appointed to the UNC Board of Governors Strategic Planning Committee liaison for the House. I was sent to a tax policy academy. I've been sent to an emerging leaders academy. I've sponsored 70 or co-sponsored 70 pieces of legislation. I've really worked hard. We've passed tax reform. We've increased education spending. I fought hard for the toll road, which I know we'll talk about tonight. The reality is, when I went to Raleigh, I went to work. I really do enjoy what I do, and I've worked hard to be a representative of all of District 98. I'm looking forward to tonight's forum, as Colin so eloquently pointed out, and most certainly I hope that I will garner your support for November 8th to go back to Raleigh and get back at it. So thank you for listening, and thanks for being here tonight.
Good evening. I'd like to thank the Chamber for hosting this incredible event, everybody for being here tonight. I want to tell you a little bit about myself, why I'm running, and why I would like to seek your vote. I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the Army. He was one of our nation's first Green Berets, and when he was stationed at Fort Bragg, he went on a blind date with a young woman who grew up in Kannapolis. And my mom's side of the family, our roots go all the way back to the 1700s in North Carolina. So after growing up in that military family, I was lucky enough to come to Davidson. And after graduating, I followed in my dad's footsteps, spending nearly the next 26 years in the United States Navy. Early on, I was on a ship that deployed in support of Operation Desert Storm. Subsequently, I was one of the first women assigned to the aircraft carrier Dwight D. Eisenhower. As a more senior officer, I held 2 different assignments at the Pentagon, and was even asked to serve on the National Security Council staff under the Bush administration. After making captain, I volunteered to go to Afghanistan in 2009. And in 2011, I earned my master's degree in National Security Strategy from the National War College. In 2014, I decided to retire after a tour in Norfolk, Virginia. But what made the transition coming back to Davidson all the more easy was the fact that 10 years ago, I was smart enough to buy a house in Davidson. But why am I running? And ladies and gentlemen, I have to say it basically boils down to what I would call 2 pieces of legislation. There's likely one that you are most familiar with. It's HB 2. And my opponent crafted it, sponsored it, and voted for it. And you want to talk about fast-tracking legislation. I pulled up the version that's got the date stamp on it. Well, you don't really need a date stamp because it was filed and turned into law on the same day, March 23rd, 2016. But there's another piece of legislation, and you might not be as familiar. It's a single piece of legislation, 1 page. This is HB 954. This is the legislation that Representative Jeter and Representative Bradford put forward in April of this year, more than 15 months after my opponent was sworn into the North Carolina House, nearly 3 years after he voted in support of tolls when he was a Corneliustown commissioner. This fast-track piece of legislation is how you got something through in a single day. This piece of legislation died in the North Carolina Senate, found to be out of order. So we've got a whole lot of issues to discuss in our district, but if you wanted to boil it down to two things, failed, passed.
All right, Campbell. You get the first question, and it is, name one or two people you admire and why you admire them.
Sure. I will tell you, it's pretty easy for me. I was blessed with amazing parents. And my mom, as I said, grew up in Kannapolis. I'll even get a little bit emotional. My mom was one of 4 daughters, and her dad died when she was 9 years old. My mom had been born in 1926, so if you do the math, he died in 1935. He was an executive with Cannon Mills. And her mom raised her and 4 daughters to be strong, independent women. And that's exactly what she was. And she raised 3 daughters, including 2 of us in this room right now, to be strong, independent women. And my dad, like I said, one of America's first Green Berets, inspirational leader, family man, man of God, and my hero.
Thank you, candidate Bradford.
So I admire my parents. You know, I come from a very simple family. We didn't come from money. My dad retired from the military, actually served in Vietnam. I remember my father working 4 jobs to make ends meet. One of those jobs, we used to deliver appliances for Sears at night. And I remember going on the Sears run, taking these TVs and big pieces of furniture, console televisions. My mom worked in the school system. In fact, she retired from the school system. In fact, my dad actually went back to college. He always wanted a college degree. When I graduated in 1996 from Clemson University, my dad went back and got his 4-year degree and graduated as well, which is a real commitment because most people won't go back to college, and my dad did. My parents raised my sister and I to understand what the value of a dollar really means, that nothing's going to be given to you. You got to roll up your sleeves and go after it. And I think we need that more than ever in America right now. So with my mom and dad, I love them very much. They're the greatest parents in the world. Thanks.
Appreciate your applause. Just try to hold that. Next question is to you, candidate Bradford. The Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce is concerned that state and federal regulations, healthcare costs, and employee benefits are weighing heavily on businesses and corporations' bottom line. What would you do as a member of the legislature to reward entrepreneurship and promote job growth?
Well, you know, I already started a company 10 years ago, and I've been facing these very issues, such as the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. This is exactly part of the reason I wanted to go to Raleigh. I know what it's like to have to sign the front of a check every 2 weeks and make payroll. And as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you know, when I went to Raleigh, there's a lot of things I want to do. Get business out of the way, or government out of the way of business owners. I want to help make sure that entrepreneurs are rewarded for growing their companies, retaining talent, hiring talent. And you know, in my first 2 years, we had out of control healthcare spending around Medicaid in North Carolina. We were $3 billion in debt. Under conservative leadership, we've paid that off, and we've brought in a system for Medicare to help control our costs. And as an entrepreneur, we want to reward those business owners by making sure that they continue to be rewarded, to keep their employees right here in North Carolina, and attract businesses through lower taxes, including corporate income taxes.
Candidate Campbell.
I think you have to look at any business situation in the holistic manner. You can't simply go after incentives, you can't go after health care, and you can't go after education in silos. This is a holistic look. Companies, the Chamber of Commerce, they want to have North Carolina be a place where businesses will want to come, folks will want to start businesses. And you do that by creating an entire environment. Some of the best schools. We've got to get back to funding our schools. And you said, the Affordable Care Act was an issue. I don't think that any of us believes that the Affordable Care Act is perfect. But I think if we had thrown out Social Security and Medicare when they were first put into place, where would we be right now? We have to take it, we have to fix it, and we have to move forward with ideas that will really work for small business and large business in North Carolina.
Thank you. And next question will be to you on other business-related matters. The amount of business flowing into North Carolina, what is your view on tax incentives given private companies to bring jobs into our state and the Charlotte region?
Okay, well just then unpack what I was already saying just a little bit further. I don't think we can draw businesses here exclusively with tax incentives. I think we have to make sure that we have outstanding public school systems. I think we have to protect our environment. We have to do so many different things and not just look as tax incentives as one exclusive way to draw business to the state of North Carolina. It's the same thing with drawing individuals. People don't come here exclusively for one reason, but they are motivated to come here when they see this complete picture. The education system, a tremendous environment, whether we're going from the mountains to the Outer Banks. We need to return North Carolina to being the place where businesses will want to relocate, not simply look at tax incentives as the be-all and end-all of that measure.
So in 1996, a little company called BMW was lured to South Carolina with tax incentives. They're supposed to produce about 2,000 cars a year and have approximately 2,000 employees. Today, because of BMW and because of all the vendors that supply BMW, they have over 20,000 jobs and they're producing hundreds of thousands of cars a year. At IBM Corporation, I worked at IBM for 10 years and we had a saying at IBM, if you could sell one more product and make one more dollar profit, it's a good move. And I strongly believe that if we think for one moment that we can recruit the largest companies to come to North Carolina by closing our eyes and not offering some sort of incentive, we are fooling ourselves. Because South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, Florida, everyone is rolling out the red carpet. Now there is a balance, you can't give away the farm, but if we can make one more dollar profit and get one more job for someone else, it helps the North Carolina economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Next question, we're going to dive right into transportation. Both candidates have gone on record as opposing the I-77 toll project. Question from the audience is, what have you done to stop the tolls and when did you get involved? 1 minute, Mr. Bradford.
Yeah, you bet. So a website, thetolltruth.com. Remember that website? In fact, I encourage you to go there. When I was a town commissioner in Cornelius, in fact, we have a person here tonight, Kurt Noss, who's the Open Government Citizen of the Year. In his own words, he will tell you how when I was a town commissioner, before I was even elected to state legislature, I led the effort to get a letter signed to try to pause the contract with the governor. So I started back when I was a commissioner. And if you go to thetolltruth.com, there's a candidate survey, and it asks both of us, what have we done to stop this project? Folks, this is where rubber meets the road, no pun intended. But this is where actions speak much louder than words. I have been a stalwart trying to stop this project to the extent that I can. House Bill 954 was never, trust me, the DOT never thought Charlie Jeter and I could get that bill through. And we got it through with a vote of 86 to 21. So thetolltruth.com, check it out, and you can learn everything you want to do about it and see what I've done. Thank you.
Okay, Campbell.
So again, the question seemed to be just exclusively in the last 2 years, which, like I said, is a very convenient timeline. So because it was 3 years ago, and 3 years ago, 2013, was nearly 4 years after the state of North Carolina started talking about tolls as a particular option. A feasibility study had been done in 2010. And in 2013, while I was still serving on active duty in the United States Navy, my opponent originally voted in support of those, right in the room next door. And we've got some copies of the documentation. Don't trust me, you don't even have to go to a website. We came here to the Cornelius Town Hall this week and got a copy of the minutes from that meeting of May 6th of 2013, and we got a copy of the next week's version. So I came back, and I will tell you, if you want to talk about rubber meeting the road, I am in this race I am going to be able to legislate in a manner, and like I said, my opponent just called 954, a success because it got through the House. But what do you call a bill that does not make it through the Senate? It's a failed piece of legislation.
Kenneth Campbell, following up on that, if elected, what should be done regarding the I-77 improvements? Can they be stopped?
That's an issue that we'll be working with the next governor and hopefully a new Department of Transportation. Because when you peel this back, I've said it before, whether we are able to pull out of the contract or we are left holding the bag when Cintra cannot complete the contract, we have to figure out what is next. But we're hamstrung at this point in time. So not only do we have the toll lanes going in, but this incredible concession contract gave them the maintenance contract for the existing lanes, prohibits us from expanding the general use lanes for that 50 years. Meanwhile, sends all of the tolls going to that overseas company. So again, I think it was an incredibly bad contract. It's one that we have to do everything that we can in order to repeal, but we have to do it in such a way so that we are not exclusively penalizing Charlotte and Mecklenburg County because of these actions. This is an interstate road system, and we have to make sure that we are looking at these systems in a holistic measure across the state of North Carolina.
So when I was a town commissioner, I was asked to vote for an RFP. And I'm an engineer by degree, many of you might not know that. In the world of engineering, we look at RFPs all the time. It's a request for proposal. Folks, a request for proposal is not a contract. A request for proposal is not voting for a project. And that's what my opponent is alluding to. At the end of the day, what's important here is my opponent is against the tolls. But what's very interesting is when she could have filed to run against me for office as a Democrat, because that's her party affiliation, she didn't file for office. So you have to ask yourself, why didn't she run for office whenever she could have if the tolls meant so much to her? But the reality is it doesn't really mean that much to her. It's just sort of rhetoric for the occasion. The reality is I have fought hard to stop 954. And by the way, 954 was never ruled out of order. My opponent just doesn't understand how legislation happens. It went to the Senate and it was never heard in a committee. It was never ruled out of order, so that's inaccurate. But in any event, if I go back to Raleigh, I'm going to work with the governor. And one last thought. You know what's very interesting is the toll contract was signed after Roy Cooper reviewed it. Thank you.
Candidate Bradford, question on the same line, because we're going to dig into the transportation issues here. On this topic, but shifting slightly, let's assume that the Cintra contract is in place for the next decade or so. How do you propose that we mitigate the congestion which will face drivers throughout the Lake Norman region whose household budget does not allow for the cost of daily tolls?
So if you go to thetolltruth.com, one of the survey questionnaires that we were asked this very question. And I outlined 7 steps that we need to do, assuming this project moves ahead. And one of them is try to go fight for money. Try to change the model of CRTPO, because right now it's driven by Charlotte. Charlotte gets 46% of a weighted vote just for saying yes or no. So when they cast their vote yes or no, it's not hard to go find a Matthews or Mint Hill, someone in the south part of town, to vote with them to get something over the finish line. So we really need to make that formula more fair for our area. One idea that I have is to try to pass legislation that would allow anyone that lives along the corridor that if they have to pay tolls, perhaps they can make it tax deductible. I mean, there's got to be something we can do, and if we have to deal with this, then we can look at expanding 115, we can look at expanding 21, and those are just some of the things that I'll go to work on when I go to Raleigh. Thanks.
Candidate Campbell, 1 minute.
Certainly. I think one of the first things that we could do is look at some best practices from other regional areas. We're certainly not the only metropolitan area that faces incredible traffic on a daily basis. Trust me, as someone who has worked inside the Washington, D.C. Beltway on several occasions. So we have to look at different options, look at different transportation options. And I gotta say, I was a geek back when I was in college, and most folks would probably say that I still am one. But I went to the proposal meeting that was held at Davidson College back in roughly 1985, when we talked about the Charlotte Regional Transportation Plan for 2025. It included a number of great things, including light rail and all these other programs. And guess what, folks? We just kept putting them all on the back burner. So if you want somebody to go forward and make sure that we don't keep putting projects on the back burner, it's about taking really hard looks. It's looking at all the different options that we might have and making sure we actually take action on them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is to candidate Campbell. Still transportation. I think I'm going to get all of them. Automobiles are more energy efficient, and some do not consume fossil fuels and are not subject to a gas tax. As the gas tax is a declining source of revenue for road improvements, how do you propose we meet our future road funding needs?
I think there are a number of ways to take a look at this. And again, we have to look beyond simply from cars that have gone from getting, I'm pretty sure I drove a car that got roughly 8 miles to the gallon at one point in time in my life, to now looking at cars that are getting in excess of 40 to 50 miles to the gallon. And so we need to make sure that we are still able to develop the appropriate revenue sources to match that. And so I think that's one of the issues that if we have strayed behind and our state revenue sources have not matched and followed with that, those are issues that we're going to have to take a look at. We're going to have to make sure that we are keeping up with the improvements, because we all want that improvement. We all want the increased miles per gallon. But it doesn't mean that we're driving on our roads any less. So again, I wasn't a math major and I wasn't an engineer, but I can do the math and I can understand that we're putting less money into the pot that still maintains and keeps our roads in the condition that we want them to be in, and we'll need to look at how we adjust those figures.
Candidate Bradford.
Jobs, jobs, jobs. The way you grow the state budget to help in areas such as infrastructure is we've got to have jobs. We've got to bring corporations to the area, because corporations, when they sell good products and services, they do pay a tax. Even though we have a low tax, they pay a tax. And the way that we can help shore up our infrastructure is by recruiting and helping business owners create jobs. Because if they're creating jobs, there's a direct correlation to the success of the corporation. That means they're growing. That means they're profitable. It means they're selling things. And when that happens, it generates revenue for the state. And vehicles are improving, obviously, with their gasoline usage. And so we cannot rely on gasoline taxes forever. We just can't. And the way to do that is jobs. Grow our economy with jobs. Period. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question is to you, Candidate Bradford. Our beautiful Lake Norman is a source of quality drinking water for our citizens and is a valuable source for recreation and tourism and is part of our North Mecklenburg lifestyle. Do you believe the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality is fulfilling its mission in regards to coal ash?
So my very first job out of college, I was an environmental engineer. So I've actually had a job which worked on soil and water protection and remediation, cleaning it up from petroleum. You know, I bucked the Republican leadership in the North Carolina House of Representatives because I was one of the very few Republicans that voted against the coal ash bill. And I did it because I understand it. I'm an environmental engineer. And the DEQ, I think they had a very good roadmap, quite frankly, which is why I did not vote for that legislation. The reality is we have to hold corporations accountable. We have to make sure they're good corporate citizens. And in my opinion, I think Duke has been getting a hall pass, and I think DEQ's plan was a good one, which is exactly why I bucked the leadership and I did what I thought was right. I do believe in protecting the environment, and after all, it's what I studied in college. And I've tried to live that by taking that to Raleigh and voting that way. Thanks.
I have to say, I commend my opponent for bucking the leadership on that one vote. I only wish he had done it a number of other times throughout his tenure in the North Carolina House. But all the more reason that you have to ensure that the regulations are there and in place. And we can't roll back the regulations and lift those restrictions that otherwise ensure that we have that safe drinking water. Now, some of you may have heard that story. My aunt and uncle were some of the first folks that were able to lease a lot on Lake Norman back in the late 1960s. $10 a month. $10 a month for 150 feet of waterfront property on Lake Norman. I've been swimming in that lake since I was probably 5 years old. And again, people come to North Carolina for our pristine environment and wilderness, and we can't lift the regulations. So I think we need to ensure that the Department of Environmental Quality is maintaining those qualities. Thank you.
And next question is to you, another one on environment. What are your plans to help protect the environment? Do you support the Regulatory Reform Act of 2015? This is a question within a question. Do you support the state suing to block the federal Clean Power Plan? And do the best you can in 1 minute.
You just want to say yes or no?
Environment good.
Yes, environment good, protect. You know, and I say that simply, but you know, go and look at the North Carolina Constitution. Our Constitution actually maintains or requires us to take care of the North Carolina environment for the citizens of North Carolina. It couldn't be more clear. And when we lift regulations to ease those kind of restrictions on corporations, we're violating the state constitution. So I absolutely support making sure that we are enforcing the North Carolina Constitution to protect the environment, to ensure that we are keeping it safe and making our environment the place that it should be for all of our citizens.
Lieutenant Bradford.
So one of the 9 committees that I serve on is the Environment Committee, because again, I think it's very appropriate for me. And as I just stated in my last answer, you know, I'll continue to work hard to protect the environment. You know, it was interesting because in one of the committees in the short session, someone started talking about solar panels and we can't put them in landfills. And very interestingly, the federal government said that solar panels need to be disposed in landfills because they're safe. And it was interesting because that's an unintended consequence. And I wanted to explain how. Imagine not allowing to take something that's been deemed as perfectly acceptable to put in a landfill because you're creating this hysteria that there's a problem. If you don't put it in a landfill, you know where it's going to end up? It's going to end up behind town hall, it's going to end up in our streams, etc. So we're environmentally conscious, and we need to be that. But we also need to be very smart about it and make sure that there are not unintended consequences.
I was trying to get a picture. Okay. The next question is to candidate Bradford. The last year in particular has been troubling when it comes to community policing and the reputation and feelings some have with law enforcement. How do we tear down the walls of anger and frustration in this country and bring people together regardless of race, gender, sexual preference, and income level? How, as a representative, with a diverse constituency, can you help the community heal?
Well, today I actually released an endorsement from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Fraternal Order of Police, which represents all active police officers of Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and I'm very proud of that endorsement. You know, I think we have to get back to trust. I mean, let's face it, every industry has bad apples, but since when did we start thinking all police officers were bad and they're out to get us? The reality is they're not. They put their lives on the line every day, and I think we need to get back to trust. And, you know, these guys, these ladies, and these men and women, they go out, they leave their families, they hope to come home at night. And when I go back to Raleigh, I'm going to continue to fight for our police officers and make sure that our community feels safe, because that's what our police officers want. They want a community to be safe. They want people to trust them. They also want you to comply so that there's no confusion and bad things don't happen. So, you know, the endorsement speaks for itself, and I will always trust and offer my support to our men and women in uniform.
Lieutenant Campbell.
Thanks. As you might imagine, I do feel a kindred spirit to those who serve, wearing the uniform of police officers, our first responders, as someone who served for more than 25 years. And I believe at the heart of it, we have to get back to community-based policing. And it is that element of trust. So we do have common ground on this particular topic. But as I've alluded to before, we also have to make sure that we are looking at these issues from our own perspectives. You know, somebody said it's important that, you know, where you sit also matters. And most of us in this room sit in a very different place than some of the victims that we have seen in recent months. And so whether it was standing on Cornelius Town Hall steps a few months ago in the aftermath of one of the incidents, or standing on the Davidson College campus with students during the Common Hour about 2 weeks ago, we have to come together, and I believe at the heart of this is an increased community policing effort.
In the same vein, can you explain your current position for body cam evidence and the definition of public records? Candidate Campbell, 1 minute.
Sure. I think what we saw in the past month was two completely different instances of how body cam imagery can be released. I'm reminded that somebody should have silenced their cell phone.
We only have a few rules, right?
I'm reminded that as a public affairs officer in the United States Navy, we used to always say, bad news doesn't get any better with age. And it's true. And I used to have to go back and tell the boss, hey, we really have to release something as soon as we can once we know what the facts are. And so to the extent that we are now going to be collecting body camera imagery, but then holding on to it, I think it's a mistake. I think you have to look for release as soon as you can, but understand that in a measure, and we have the expertise to be able to show it, to realize that one body cam from one particular vantage point does not tell the whole story. But when you release edited piece of imagery, you cause everybody in the audience to be a skeptic.
So I've supported, families get to see it first, and a lot of people don't talk about that. But there has to be a method to it. You just can't release it before the right people have looked at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is to candidate Bradford. How will you fund education, schools and teachers? Will you increase funding in the state budget, and how will you fund it? Be specific.
So right now, we have a $22 billion state budget. That's with a B, $22 billion. 57% of the $22 billion, so for any math majors, about $12.5 billion, is spent on education in North Carolina. That's an incredible amount, if you think about that. I've only been in Raleigh 2 years. Both times I've voted to increase spending in education. We also, though, have to make sure we hold our education system accountable. And I'm very fortunate to work with Rhonda Lennon, who snuck in, who is our District 1 superintendent. And, you know, we need to make sure that we are responsibly spending that money so that we can improve the experience for the child in the classroom, because that's where it matters most. Not bureaucratic levels at a giant machine in Raleigh, but at the classroom level. And the way to increase spending is to make sure we're holding everybody accountable and make sure that every dollar spent is a smart dollar spent.
Candidate Campbell.
I think one of the important things to note is that out of the pot of money that we used to exclusively fund our public school system, we're on the verge of splitting it out into 4 pots. We're already pulling money into the charter school system, which I think the charter schools were set up with a great premise in mind. Create those incubators where we can test great new ideas, put a cap on the number of those schools, and make sure that we are holding them accountable for spending our own tax dollars in educating the children. But then we've started pulling money out of our public tax dollars to send some kids to private schools. This year it's more than $24 million coming out of that public education fund. But the legislature has deemed that they're going to add $10 million each additional year to that, up to $144 million coming out of our tax dollars to send kids to private schools. And lastly are the achievement school districts, a bill sponsored by my opponent, which is basically privatizing and turning over to corporations to run our public school systems. I think we need to get back and focus on the original idea of public schools and the charter schools developed to enhance our public school system.
You could stand up and continue talking, because our next question is on charter schools. How do you view the balance between the public schools and charter schools? I know you covered a little bit of that.
So a little bit there. So again, my number one point is the fact that we can do no harm to the kids in our public school system, in all of our school systems. That's not what this should be. And as people are going through and making budget line items, we have to realize that that translates into individual classrooms to individual students. So one, start with an absolutely do no harm element to any budgetary move. But again, fundamentally going back, I think we need to reduce the number of charter schools back to where the cap was. Based on the number of failing charter schools, I think it may just be a matter of their own attrition. And then get back to making sure that our public schools and our public school teachers are the number one important thing that we are focused on. Test out those great new ideas in the charter schools, and then roll the lessons learned on the positive stuff into the public schools. And where we learn a lesson that we don't want to repeat in public schools, then let it just be a great lesson learned that we don't implement into the public schools.
Candidate Bradford, public schools and charter schools.
Sure. So, these two can coexist. They have coexisted. What's really interesting is charter schools, they get a fraction of the money that our public schools get per child. And they are forced to have to do more with less. But they're performing very well. So let's think about that. They're performing very well, and they're doing it with a much smaller budget because they're driven by results, and they're run very businesslike. At the end of the day, charter schools are not going to take over because, quite frankly, they don't work everywhere. But there are lots of areas where they do work. Mecklenburg is one of them. In fact, my children go to a charter school. But there are also some very great traditional public schools that work very, very well. And really what needs to happen is these two organizations need to come together and do best practices and learn from each other. So they can exist. And as far as the Achievement School District goes that she alluded to, what she said is inaccurate. That legislation does not drive for-profit charters. It lets the superintendent for the state make the decision on what kind of charter it will be. And it very well could be all nonprofit. Thank you.
Next question to candidate Bradford. Regardless of the political party and moving away from who is to blame, what would you do if elected as our House member about HB 2 and restoring North Carolina's reputation in the national and international perception? And I'd also like to add another question from the audience. What would you see as the way forward if HB 2 was repealed? And let's build to 2 minutes on this.
So let me tell you what you're never going to really see in the media about HB 2. And I talked about this last week at our last forum. Number one, you're not going to see that the Charlotte Ordinance was a violation of state law. Let's just, regardless of policy, let's just talk about the fact that the ordinance was against state law. Could you imagine Cornelius having to follow rules that Huntersville sets? Our Constitution does not allow municipalities to make ordinances beyond their city limits. What you won't hear about House Bill 2 is that when it was voted on, 25% of the Democrats in the North Carolina House voted for House Bill 2. And do you know why they voted for House Bill 2? Because they also agreed that cities should not be allowed to go beyond their city limits, period. There have been 2 attempts from leadership at the House and the Senate to work with Charlotte to try to come up and fix this issue. And it's been failed efforts because Charlotte leadership wants to play politics. They want to play politics and put the well-being of their city and their state ahead of what's best for North Carolina. So when I go back to Raleigh, I will continue to try to work with Charlotte and say, hey, why can't we both work together, start over, and you pass an ordinance that's lawful and within your city limits. Thank you.
Candidate Campbell, 2 minutes.
Sure. As some of you, I think some of you may have even attended, I went to one of the very early on Chamber of Commerce Friday forums, and Senator Tart and Senator Ford showed up, and we talked about HB 2. And I don't want to quote Senator Tart, but in jest, it was that HB 2 was a bad piece of legislation, roughly. And maybe he would change it how he phrases it now. But if this was all about Charlotte, because clearly the talking points have changed. The early on talking points were this was about protecting our women and children. the talking points have now changed to it's all Charlotte's fault. So even if I cede the ground that we only wanted HB2 to discriminate against those members of the LGBTQ community, if we cede that ground, then why? Why did you turn around and impact every single North Carolinian, taking away every single working North Carolinian's ability to sue in state courts that they pay for with their tax dollars? Why did you work on the minimum wage issue? And why did you take away every single municipality's ability to set their own non-discrimination policies? Ladies and gentlemen, if this was all about Charlotte, you simply would have vacated Charlotte's ordinance. And oh, by the way, when they did that on March 23rd, I went up and checked. I looked at my calendar a couple of times. Charlotte's ordinance was scheduled to go into effect on April 1st. My calendar says there's at least 7 days in between March 23rd and April 1st where there could have been discussion with the citizens of North Carolina. So again, if it was all about Charlotte, why add on 3 completely unrelated issues that were discriminatory, couldn't get through in the normal session of the North Carolina General Assembly? It's bad legislation, folks.
Candidate Campbell, next question for you. North Carolina House District 98. Well, sorry, that's the title. How do you feel about expanding federal health care programs into North Carolina?
Sure. And I alluded to it a little bit in one of my previous answers. If we go back and look at the monumental programs that we have in place today, whether we're talking about Social Security, whether we're talking about Medicare or Medicaid, none of them were perfect right out of the chute. None of them. But what we do have to do is work and make what we have better. And I think the expansion of the Affordable Care Act would ensure roughly 500,000 North Carolinians who right now don't have that health care. And you also have to remember that as a business owner, I mean, he already knows this, that most folks in North Carolina are already, that they're covered by their employer-based system. But this would cover an additional 500,000 North Carolinians and create roughly 40,000 new jobs based on some folks' estimation. So I think it's critically important. I think it is part of that baseline of what will make North Carolina even better.
You know, I must say I'm surprised that my opponent is so supportive of this, because right now we have a single payer system in North Carolina because every healthcare provider has bailed on the program. We're down to Blue Cross Blue Shield. And the VA is a single source system, and look how much the VA is failing. Do you know in 2016, Blue Cross Blue Shield went up on its premiums 36% on North Carolinians? And do you know that they are now asking for a 24% increase in your premiums for 2017? Do the math, folks. 36% 2016, 24% 2017. Will it be 30% 2018? Will it be 25% 2019? It's a failed policy. Even Democrats are running for the hills on this one. This is a bad program for North Carolina. This is not the way, and this is nothing more than an attack on your pocketbook.
Candidate Bradford, next question. What will you do to maintain the North Carolina budget surplus, and what budgeting experience do you have?
Well, you know, in North Carolina, in the last 4 years, we've bailed the state out of $3 billion in debt. We've created 2 straight surpluses. We just had this little hurricane called Matthew that broke a levee out in eastern North Carolina. Do you know that for the first time in the history of North Carolina, and mind you, there was 100 years when it was under Democratic control, but under Republican control, we have put away over $1.6 billion in reserves and rainy day funds for something that we might not know could happen, such as Hurricane Matthew. The reality is, I have experience because I'm 2 years coming from Raleigh. Jobs, jobs, jobs. This is what creates revenue for North Carolina. And if we continue our plight to reduce taxes, we've reduced personal income taxes so you can take more home from your paycheck. We've reduced corporate income taxes so companies want to come here. It's simple. Jobs. That's what we have to do. And under fiscal conservative leadership, we are most certainly doing great things in North Carolina.
the very end, I was desperately trying to remember what the question was. It always went back to jobs.
What will you do to maintain the North Carolina budget surplus, and what is your budgeting experience?
Budget surplus, but we went back to jobs, and again, go to a bill that has cost us more jobs and more money from our state, and including our reputation. So those things don't jive for me. And I was asked in terms of the budgeting experience, and I sat down and was telling Bill Russell one day, because a lot of times you don't really translate somebody's military career to what it's like in the business industry. But my last job was working at a $14 billion a year organization with 165,000 employees. And while you might not think that I would get that involved in day-to-day budget stuff, we had to deal with this little thing called sequestration. So I will tell you, we got into the weeds, and we figured out how we were going to move forward with everything from aircraft carrier maintenance plans to how we were going to deploy ships on time, and down to the weeds, because I had a 4-star boss who was about the most detail-oriented guy you could ever imagine.
Thank you. Next question is for Candidate Campbell. What will you do to help stop terrorist attacks here as a legislature in North Carolina? 1 minute.
Well, I will tell you. I mean, that's one of the more complex questions to ask somebody who is running for the North Carolina House. But I do happen to be the only person who has served our country for more than 25 years in uniform. My degree from the National War College is in National Security Strategy. Again, I worked on the National Security Council staff at the White House underneath the Bush administration. Some of my accounts included the counterterrorism account, the intelligence account, the defense account. And I worked very closely with those individuals. So I think I have the absolute best vision for understanding how North Carolina will integrate into the national intelligence structure, and how we have to understand everything from protected infrastructure issues to how you then take things at a state level and make sure that we are absolutely integrated down at a local level. It's a challenging issue. It's one that we can't turn away from. But I will tell you that I believe that my 26 years of experience give me that best perspective.
You know, under the Obama administration, we've been taking a lot of people in North Carolina, and we're not really sure what they stand for or what they're going to do to us. You know, at the end of the day, this is a federal issue, no doubt, but North Carolinians, you know, we can protect ourselves by making sure that the left doesn't take away our guns, folks. I've been endorsed by the...
Let's maintain some decorum, please.
It's called civility. So we need to make sure that we have the ability to bear arms. I'm very proud to say that I've received an A+ rating from the NRA. You know, at the end of the day, we need to make sure that our families are safe. We need to tell police officers and truancy officers in school to pay attention. If you see something that looks out of the norm, call the authorities, because that's really about the best thing we can do. But most certainly, I can tell you it is a federal issue, and there's a lot of work to be done, because under our current administration, it's a bad situation. We've had poor leadership there. Thank you.
Candidate Bradford, next question to you. What single issue facing North Carolina will have the most impact on our state and district during the upcoming term, and why?
Well, I would say that we've got the potential for 5 Supreme Court members to be appointed under the next national administration. And that's going to have far-reaching implications, not only for North Carolina, but for this entire country. You know, I would tell you, when you go to the ballot box, whether it be early voting or November 8th, the judicial races never get enough attention. You really need to make sure you understand who the judges are and why they're running and who you're going to vote for. Because in North Carolina, they're considered nonpartisan. But the reality is, and both parties do it, everyone wants to stick a voter guide in your face and say, vote for this judge. You really need to make your own decisions about that. But I think one of the most strong things we're facing here is making sure that we get a fair judicial system to make sure that North Carolina, that our laws are protected. And it's a real shame that under our current Attorney General, we've had no one fighting to protect our laws. And that's a real shame. So I'm hopeful that the next Attorney General will stand up and support the laws and the will of the North Carolina people.
Candidate Campbell. Please remember the question.
I remember the question. And I would have to agree that the Supreme Court nomination process is going to be that critical national issue. And I only wish that our 2 U.S. senators had done their job over the past year. Never in our nation's history have we allowed a vacated seat on the Supreme Court under the guise of saying it was the final year. It's the Senate's job. It's in their job description. So yes, we stood out there one day and stood out and held signs in front of our senators' offices and said, do your job. So there wouldn't be 5, there would only be 4. And we wouldn't be facing the current 4-4 decisions that then put issues back at the lower courts if our senators had only done their job.
All right. I think that's all the general questions we have. We're looking at the time, and we're going to get to the fun part. Remember this?
Oh, yeah.
All right, so each candidate's going to pull a random question out, give them a few minutes to answer, and then we have the lightning round coming up after that. Okay. What was the first thing you bought with your own money?
This probably wouldn't. I would say the first thing of significance that I remember buying with my own money, it's something that will surprise very few of you who know me, and that was a camera. Throughout the years, I've told many folks that literally up until the current car I'm driving, I never bought a new car, but I've got nice cameras.
All right, thank you. Oops, not that one. Okay. If you could choose to stay a certain age forever, what age would it be?
You know, gosh, I guess it would be, do I get 2 minutes, Alan? You know, 25 years old was a good age for me. We were engaged then. I was living in Memphis, Tennessee. I was working on my own. I was away from my family, which my parents said that's how you grow up. So I was kind of out on my own in this great big town called Memphis, Tennessee. And I was 25 years old, and it was a good age. It was something very memorable about it. Life was simpler. We had a puppy, and we just walked it, and we I remember sucking these bomb pops that looked like a little rocket, and we would just go for walks, and we had the dog. So that was a good memory for me.
All right. So lightning round or another grab bag question? Ready for lightning round?
Lightning round.
Okay. This is to get to know the candidates personally. There's no right or wrong answer, and answer as quickly as you can. So I'm going to ask either or questions, and we'll start with candidate Campbell. You okay with that? All right. And they're going to be different for each candidate. You ready?
I'm ready.
You look ready.
Okay.
Coke or Pepsi?
Cheer wine.
That's a very important North Carolina question regarding barbecue. Vinegar or tomato-based barbecue?
Vinegar. But let's even be real specific. Let's go for Mallard Creek Presbyterian Church. Let's go for the Slaw at Bethel Presbyterian. The candy gams at Mount Zion. And if you can pass up the desserts at Davidson Presbyterian, you're a better person than I am.
Fame or fortune?
Neither.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunrise, because too many people miss it.
Cats or dogs?
Both.
Adventurous or cautious?
Adventures.
Detailed or abstract?
Detailed.
Roller coaster or Ferris wheel?
Roller coaster.
Bagels or muffins?
Bagels.
Ready, aim, fire or ready, fire, aim?
Ready, aim, fire.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek.
PC or Mac?
Mac.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate, dark.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
Spring or fall?
Fall.
You prefer books or movies?
Books.
Chinese food or Italian food?
Home cooking.
Board games or video games?
Board games.
Okay. Numbers or letters?
Numbers.
Paper or plastic?
Paper.
Pen or pencil?
Pen.
Math or English?
Both.
Singing or dancing? And if you could demonstrate.
Neither, and the world is a better place.
Football or basketball or baseball?
Basketball.
right.
Wildcat basketball.
Okay. Candidate Bradford, are you ready?
Sure.
Lightning
What
round.
you got?
Can you handle it?
I can handle
Okay. Can they handle
it.
it? Home cooked meal or dining out?
Home cook.
Farmer's market or supermarket?
Farmer's market.
Coffee or tea?
Tea. Sweet. Chick-fil-A.
Early bird or night owl?
Night out.
Introvert or extrovert?
Extrovert.
If the audience knew the answer. Hugs or kisses?
But I really like both, but go with hugs.
Spring or fall?
Fall.
Wine or beer?
Beer.
Antique or brand new?
Antique.
James Bond or Jason Bourne?
Bond. James Bond.
Saver or spender?
Savor.
Call or text or email?
Call.
Think before you talk or talk before you think?
Think before you talk.
You've already covered this. Sweet tea or unsweet tea?
Sweet.
Half empty or half full?
Half full.
Questions or answers?
Questions.
Airplane or boat?
Boat.
Heart or brain?
Brain.
Thesaurus or dictionary?
Dictionary.
Shoes or barefoot?
Rainbows.
Or flip-flops?
Rainbow flip-flops.
Lover or a fighter?
I'm a fighter.
Fox or CNN?
Fox.
Shower or bath?
Shower.
Facebook or Instagram?
Facebook.
One good friend or lots of okay friends?
I like lots of friends.
All right.
Thank
Thank you very much. So to conclude, we'll have a 3-minute closing statement, and Candidate Campbell, if you would start us off with that, please.
Sure. And I really do want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I think this is an incredible opportunity for everybody to get to listen. And I really like the format and the way that we can close, with the lightning round and finding out those critically important details about your candidates, I think are great. Now, some of you may have been wondering what this big old black notebook was sitting up here on this desk. And ladies and gentlemen, those are all of the original petition sheets. The more than 2,800 signatures that I got on petitions to even get into this race. So, to me, that shows my level of investment, my belief in the democratic process. So, I completely admit that I did not get into this race by the filing deadline. I'm the first person to stand up and tell you that I didn't. But when faced with the discriminatory legislation that we've already talked about, I decided to do something. And the fact that no one else had stood up for the multitude of other critically important issues facing us in the 98th district, that's their call. But I decided to get involved based on the one issue. But I'm going to be anything but a one-issue candidate. And I hope just some of the things that I've talked about this evening have let you know that my 26 years as a career public servant is something that I hold on to and I cherish. And I cherish the democratic process that I stood up and defended each and every day for nearly 26 years. And so I've told the story that when I realized that our incumbent didn't even have an opponent in November's election, that's when I got involved. Hold me accountable for the fact that I didn't get involved sooner. That's fine. But look at the book. Look at the more than 2,800 signatures that I got to be fully invested in this race. The time commitment. The level of effort put forth by a multitude of volunteers. Ladies and gentlemen, I am fully invested in this because I believe in better things for the state of North Carolina. I believe we have to do the right things for not only the current generations, but for the future generations. And if you saw last Sunday's Charlotte Observer, HB2 is not the way to do it. It's discriminatory. It's hateful. It hurt people, and it continues to hurt people. And that's why I'm in this race.
Candidate Bradford, go 3 minutes in your closing statement. Candidate Bradford.
You bet. Well, first I again want to thank my wife and kids for being here tonight, and a lot of good friends here, and some employees and campaign staff. You know, REBIC. REBIC stands for Realtors and Builders of North Carolina. They're not a political group. They've endorsed me. Firefighters and paramedics in North Carolina. They're not a political group. They put their lives on the line every day. They've endorsed me. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Fraternal Order of Police. They're not a political group. They're just out there trying to keep us safe. They've endorsed me. North Carolina Chamber of Commerce. They've endorsed me. They're not a political group. They just want jobs. I-77 Business Plan Group, which is the only anti-toll group out there. They know my record. They know my opponent's record. They endorsed me. The reality is, I just want to share with you that none of those groups are far right or far left. They're just everyday people that we all probably encounter every day. And they're supporting me for this race because they know I'm a common sense guy. You know, every 2 years, there's this ranking in Raleigh. And every legislator, doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, you want to know what the ranking is. And this is my first time really experiencing this, so I didn't, I guess, realize how important it really was. But it's the North Carolina Center for Public Policy. And what it does is it takes all the media, anybody that is a media carrying card member up in Raleigh, it takes all the lobbyists, if you're a registered lobbyist, and then it takes all the members, and we get a survey, and we rank each other. And out of that survey, I'm very proud to tell you that out of the 20 freshmen in the North Carolina House, I was ranked the second most effective legislator. And again, that's by the media, right? I mean, the media, lobbyists. That's an important ranking because, again, it's a nonpartisan thing. And you can ask anyone in Raleigh and they will tell you that that's an incredible benchmark. You know, I'm an independent thinker. I support clean energy. I received an Emerging Leader Award for clean energy. I'm just a regular guy, folks, trying to do good things. I've got 4 kids. You know, I'm trying to lead by example, created jobs right here in the community. I'm all in on District 98. And I want to go back. I want to keep doing what I'm doing. You know, this is hard. My family makes a great sacrifice because when you go to Raleigh, you go 4 days a week, week after week after week while you're in session. And I'm fortunate to have a family that supports me. And I'm fortunate enough to have grown a business where I can afford to go because we make $13,000. You don't do this for the money, folks. You do it because you think you have something to offer. And my business strength, my entrepreneurial spirit, I have a lot to offer. I hope I can count on your support. My website is electbradford.com. If you support me, I've got yard signs right here. Take one and tell your friends to come out and vote for John Bradford. Thank you for taking time out of your night to be here. Thanks for listening. And thank you.
Both of our candidates for for coming up here.
We're gonna have a little sock off here.
We're gonna have a little sock off here, just to keep it light. And we're gonna see who's got the best socks on tonight. Oh, it looks like Bill Russell. Whoa, here we go. You know, the lightning round was the first for the chamber. Now the sock off might be.